and welcome. Today I'm going to show you how I built this very simple lathe cart using a few tools and a weekend or so. The top houses bolt blanks and spindle blanks, and the cupboard doors, operated by this simple lock feature, have all my turning equipment. I started by marking the measurements onto a piece of MDF. This would be what forms the top of the lathe cart. I then cut out the shape using my Bosch jigsaw. Here's a closer look if you're interested. It took quite a long time to get through this piece of MDF as it's quite a thick piece of wood. I then used my tenon saw to cut the CLS timber to size. So we're moving on to the next stage of the project now, which is cutting the leg supports. So these are going to be what holds the top of the workbench and also the base. So I need 4 of these, and they're I think about 83 centimetres, which will account for the 75mm diameter wheels which will be going to the base of this. So I'm going to cut the last one of these out, and then after that we'll move on to assembling it all up, and then we'll work out how we're going to account for the spindle blanks and the cupboard sections. So we started assembling the plywood and the legs. At the moment, as you can see, it's very sort of falling over, and that's because the plywood's quite flimsy without any reinforcements. So we're going to attach the last leg, and then we'll put some attachments here which will help support it and will help with sort of the strength and integrity of the workbench. I then started drilling and screwing all of the bracing into the lathe cart. These bits of bracing are crucial to the build, as this is what helps keep the lathe cart stable and ensures it doesn't fall apart when it's in use. I made sure I measured these really accurately, as obviously you want this to be a really tight fit and you don't want it to wiggle about. I then continued to cut more bracing for the lathe cart, and then I started to cut the piece of plywood to size. This is what I would be using for the side of the lathe cart, and this would maybe hold a bit of PPE equipment and maybe some lathe tools or something like that. So we've sort of finished the cart in terms of the main construction. So I've got the top done, well, sorry, I should say the 2 sides done and the bottom done. We now need to screw the top onto it, and also look at doing the cupboards and the drawers, which will be for the spindle blanks. Sorry, the divider for the spindle blanks. I then measured the pieces of wood. These would be what holds the piece of MDF to the top of the lathe cart. The MDF was about 18mm thick, so I wanted to make sure the lathe cart had enough integrity to hold it all together. Once I'd cut these, I then drilled 2 screws into each side. I used a 3.5mm drill bit and some 4mm screws. I then countersunk them as well and drove them in using the drill again, just with a screw bit on it. I used really long screws here. I think they were about 70mm and some were 80mm. This really ensured it was a nice strong fit. I then got my friend to help hold the piece of bracing in whilst I drove 2 screws into each side. After that, I moved on to using my random orbit sander, just to ensure the piece of plywood was flush with the CLS timber. This ensures your workbench is flat, which obviously is really important. We then moved on to making sure this piece of wood was in the dead centre of the workbench. This is what will be the measurement, I guess, for the cabinets, so you really want this to be perfectly centred. I got my friend to measure one end and I measured the other one as we drove some screws in and got it all lined up in place. Having my friend here really helped with this project, as if I had to do it by myself it would have been a really big challenge, as holding a piece of wood in and screwing it all together whilst also making sure it was centred would be quite a challenge. We then started working on the bottom panels, and then after my friend had gone, I started working on the bits that would hold the spindle blank section in place. These were 4 bits of CLS timber, all cut to the same measurements with lots and lots of bracing. I wanted these to be able to take a fair amount of weight, so I ensured I put tons of bracing in. You probably don't need to put quite as much bracing as I did, but I wanted to be on the safe side of it. So with all of these bits here now cut, what we need to do now is we need to actually make the bits that are going to go from here to here to here to here. So basically the panel that will sit here and the panel that will sit here. So I finally managed to fit the top to this shelf. It was a little bit of a nightmare because I had to remove the panel here, I had to remove all of the bracing on the top, but we've got it in. There's a few minor gaps, but nothing major. A couple of midget gaps, such as there, but nothing I'm concerned about. I think it looks really good, so what we're going to do now, that's the gaps I'm on about just there, but it doesn't really matter. They're not that obvious. So we need to add those top bits back on, add the side on, add the top on, add the back panel on, brace the cupboards, add the cupboards, hinge the cupboards, add the sticker wall on, and then we'll be done. And I added the casters, as I said last time, so it moves about nicely. So we're going to install the casters onto this. So we're just going to put them in the corners here. This is obviously the upside down of the cart. And we need to find some suitable screws that aren't too thick because this is quite thin plywood. So I'm going to have a look what I've got. So this is how I've affixed the casters. I'm using a gold washer with a screw, and I've screwed 4 of those in, and obviously a thicker screw at the end. Which, this is plenty strong, I can lift it up by this caster and it's absolutely fine. So that's how I'm going to be affixing these. Cool. Okay, so I've attached all of the bracing and the side panels back onto this cart. So now I want to focus on getting this big panel here put onto the back of this and working out how we're going to do the cupboard doors. Now there's many ways to hang cupboard doors. I'm just going to use some standard butt hinges. It says recommended use for hanging light medium weight cupboard doors. So they're perfect for this, and they're going to go on the back of this somewhere here. I'll tilt the camera down a little bit so you can see what I mean. So they're going to go on here. This will probably be the back, the other side will be the front. I'm going to get the top bolted on, but this is plenty strong. I mean, I can sit on this with no problem. I then screwed the MDF top onto the cart. Okay, so at the moment I'm working on attaching the MDF top to this. I'm using these screws for this. We've got another 3 corners to do, so we're going to work about doing that now. It's a bit of a challenge attaching a top because obviously it's got to be perfectly flat and everything, but we're getting there with it and it's looking pretty good at the moment. I do need to tidy up a couple of bits, get the jigsaw, just flush it against the side of the lathe cart, but that's easy to do. So I've cut the panel to size and we're going to attach it. So hopefully these tiny screws should be absolutely fine. I'm going to try and use those and see whether they'll be alright on this. I then drove in about 30 screws which held the back panel on. This was an awful lot, but it was quite a flimsy panel, so I wanted to make sure it was well secured. Alright, so we're going to work on doing the cupboard doors now. So the internal measurements are 44, so we'll mark that on if I knew where the pencil was, which is here. So 44, we'll mark that. We're going to go a little bit less because we want these to fit nicely. I then cut the bracing for the bottom of the cupboard doors. Again, I cut this out of this 63mm by 38mm CLS timber. I really like this stuff as it's dirt cheap, and you get 2.4 metre lengths for about £3, which I think's a really good price. I then moved on to cutting out the cupboard door sections. I used 5mm plywood for this, but I would have preferred to use 12mm plywood, although I didn't have any, so I just made do with what I had. It will be absolutely fine for this project, as there isn't any particular weight needing to be held on these doors. All it's really holding is 2 hinges and a handle. I then cleaned up the first door to ensure it fitted really nicely. After that, I moved on to cutting out the second door. I used the first door as a template for this and just used a pencil to mark round it. I checked for fit with that as well and cleaned off any necessary parts. As the plywood was very thin, I used 2 little bits of wood to help hold the hinges, as there wasn't enough thickness in the plywood. So I've done the doors now just by hanging them like that with a bit of plywood on the back. So we're going to screw those in. I had this appealy bit of spindle blank that I bought from Surrey Timbers, and I thought why not just cut off a little section of it. So I'm going to use this and probably have these as the door handles. I then moved on to fitting the cupboard doors. I used 2 hinges on each cupboard door, screwed these into the CLS timber and checked for fitment. I wanted to ensure the doors opened and closed really nicely and felt comfortable in the hand. After fitting both the cabinet doors, I moved on to organising the lathe contents. There was quite a lot of stuff in here, so I just did my best to make it really organised so that when I went into there I could find everything I needed. I really enjoyed this process as it showed me what I actually had. I've also added this little catch so when I'm turning, the doors won't swing out under any vibrations or things like that. Here's a look at the tidy drawers. So we've got turning tools in there, pen blanks in there, turning tool there, some dies and things there, some finishes, some paper towels, some drill chucks, some drill bits. And then in here we've got bowl blanks, Zebrano, beech, ash, purple heart, babinga, beech, oak, some more oak, 2 wild mango, ash, Zebrano, ash, 2 sapilis, a panga panga, an ash and an umbelo spindle blank. So that's all my turning stuff there, and then we can obviously close the doors like so, and then we can just simply lock it like that. Thank you very much for watching this video. I really hope you've enjoyed watching it and maybe making it. I had an absolute blast building this thing. It was very challenging at times purely because I hadn't done something of this scale before. Now, I learnt an absolute ton from this, so I'm going to be attempting to build a miter saw station with flip-up sides so that you can have a long board going across it, maybe in a month's time or so. I bought some of the wood to do it, and I'm going to have a look at what miter saw I want to get. If you guys have any suggestions of how I can improve this lathe cut, as it is currently, by maybe adding things, let me know. On the sides, I'm thinking of adding PPE equipment and maybe some turning tools. Thank you very much for watching this video. I really hope you've enjoyed it. Try and find a cabinet door. So next time I'm going to attempt to make a miter saw station. I've never done that before either, but they're all really big and great learning curves. Thank you very much for watching this video.